This slideshow is about the ontology of the human being. This is a phenomenological understanding that we've developed over the last 40 years, and it concentrates on the study of consciousness and the objects of direct experience that have allowed us to co-create a model of reality that we find extraordinary, and I hope you too. The work is derived from what's called the Great Chain of Being. This was really initially put together by people like Plato and Aristotle, Heraclitus, and many of the great luminaries over the centuries. It is, rather sort of seen as ill researched nowadays because, of course, we know much better. But in those days, and really in the present time, we've sort of felt that we humans have developed from what's been before. So within us are all the kingdoms. And this is a chain of being that actually has preceded us and also, if we like, goes forwards beyond us. To put context into this work, we've used an American physicist, a quantum physicist, called David Bohm and his work. Mr. Bohm decided that he needed to call something a sort of non-partisan mode. So instead of using the words God or Allah or the idea of Advaita or the One or a singularity, or even, in fact, the idea of Brahman, he suggested that there was this central core running through absolutely everything. And he called this the implicate reality. And what he suggested was that enfolded, like a sort of rose that hasn't come out and shown its beauty, it's all wrapped up. So everything is wrapped up in this central core. And that we, as humans, can unfold from that implicate reality as the explicate. So we unfold from this. It's like the universes and the cosmos and all the sort of known aspects of what's out there actually is unfolding from this central implicate reality. Accompanying this, he suggested, or perhaps it's me, I've suggested that we're accompanied by the Spirit, or the Holy Spirit, grace, the Ruach Kodesh, which is an Arabic form of the same thing, or Ruach Kodesh, which comes from Jewish terminology. So as we descend into this world as a soul, we sort of about turn. And as we about turn, we go through all the kingdoms to come out as a human being and as a noble creature, and eventually back to the source. Perhaps we need a little consideration of what ontology infers. What it really means is the study of being, or what exists. This particular piece that you're listening to is what makes us human. What are the criteria? Are there bits and pieces of us that are evidently missing? Are they tangible? What is the contingencies that these qualities allow themselves to occurring or existing, but is there a sort of quantifiable, but only if. So it's the idea that we have qualities or resources or aspects within us as humans that make us human, but they may be missing. In a very simple way, we could say what exists. Well, we know that there is a mineral kingdom, and that's followed by the viral kingdom, the Monera, then fungal, vegetal, amphibian, reptilian, and then, of course, the avian, animalia, and eventually us, the human kingdom. And this is important for us to recognize because phylogenetically, we now understand that we contain much of what's gone before, and that, for example, the fungal and Monera kingdom reside within us quite considerably and are part of our DNA and part of the way that we function. As humans, we should consider that this journey that we're going to talk about is a journey of maturation or development. We metaphorically made the promise in our souls to come back to the source, and we grow in different stages, of course, through childhood, into teenage years, into young adulthood, and then, of course, into proper adulthood when we are actually going to work, marrying or having partnerships or not, going through and finding who we are, in other words, our purpose and calling in life. And during those periods, we have moments of rites of passage, either official or ritualistic or by happen chance. But what this does is to mature who we are and develop our consciousness and awareness of us as a human being. To go back to the idea of what exists, we obviously have to sort of entertain the idea that we live with these kingdoms, these separate kingdoms, residing within us. So we have a material elemental kingdom, so that's the cells of our body, it's the matrix, it's the bones, it's the tissue, it's all the structure that makes us up as a human being. Now, to make that alive, we have the vegetal kingdom. The vegetal kingdom, if you like, gives us the supporting capacity in all its physiological systems to enable us to breathe, to excrete, to digest, to basically go about the everyday tasks of living as a human. Within that vegetal kingdom, perhaps below it or in it, are both the Monera and fungal kingdoms. So they support the vegetative part of us by giving us, as we now know, the virome and the biome that co-support us in health and well-being. Now, on top of that, we have our jointed body, our muscular body. Of course, those are elemental qualities, but actually also they allow us to move. And it's this movement that changes who we are. So no longer are we static plants, we're actually moving animals. We can go into different environments, we can walk around, we can climb mountains, we can go into the Arctic, we can create buildings or shelters so that we can survive, where this animal quality gives us the enormous advantage of being able to go, as I said, into different environments. And then, sitting on top of us is the human kingdom, which actually is a very tiny, tiny bit of our brain, which is the neocortex. And the neocortex supports what's below. So what's below is the mammalian cortex, what's below that is the midbrain, and below that is the reptilian brain. So there you've got the material, vegetal, animal, and then human kingdoms as parts of our brain. To continue this conversation, we could basically say that the material part of us is our constitution, but it's also the cellular organizational matrix that allows us to be an upright, walking, doing, fixing, thinking human being. And within that, we've just suggested that both our biome and virome coexist within us, and when balanced, create an equitable environment for us to survive. Then we have the organs, the viscera, all the sort of systems that allow us physiologically to be able to digest, to be able to heal, to be able to nurture ourselves. On top of that, we've just suggested that our joints and our muscles, our ability to move through time and space, which is the animal or instinctual part of us, the mammalian cortex, the smell brain, and the cerebelli, which allow us to create complex movements through space. And then, of course, on top, again, is the neocortex, which makes us very human. The functional neurological equivalencies of these levels are important for us to recognize. So we have, at the material level, neurologically, we have the capacity of us to notice. Why? Well, because we have in our brainstem and our sort of primitive neural relays the ability to switch on and switch off at a local level, at a muscular level, at a cellular level. In other words, the reflex mechanisms that we've, if you like, been built into us from lower life forms are an extraordinarily important part of us, which enable us to survive at a sort of very primitive level. However, at a neurological level or a level of competency, it allows we, the human, to notice what's going on around us and, metaphorically, out of the corner of our eye, so that actually we can see things that normally most people miss out. And that's an important part of our development as a human. And then the viscera and physiological systems and the fields that we coexist in, which are held by the plexi or chakras, these allow us to have an awareness of our self. So we can have interoception, which is a capacity to feel what's going on with our organs within our body. And then we can have all these other sensory capacities to be aware of not only what's inside us, but what's around us. And this awareness, which is a neurological equivalency of the autonomic nervous system, allows us to really coexist in the world and be aware of what is around, and therefore it enhances our capacity to survive and to be wary of the other and to be careful because we've just sensed that something's going on. So it's a very important part of us. And then we have attentiveness, which is the mammalian or animal aspect of what the neurology allows us to develop. Now, this is, of course, part of our locomotive capacity, our survival capacity, and really the animal is the part of us that manipulates us and also allows us to have movement through life and to create habits. So this attentiveness is the ability to see and to sense and to be cognitive, but at an animal or instinctual level, what's going on around us and who's jostling for position, who's the bigger male or female, who's wanting to get that job. So it's a very important part of our consciousness. At the level of the human, we have the capacity to be mindful. Now, this sort of modern phrase is really the idea that we have an educated brain, it's full of information, sometimes an awful lot of rubbish, but occasionally some really good stuff. And what we're able to do is to open that brain so it's sort of not empty, but open and receptive. And this autonomy of our thinking allows us to have really fairly good executive functioning and organizational capacities, but also to allow things to pop into our minds that otherwise might not be there. And I think this leads us to what we might call consciousness, which is a higher level of being. It's an integral whole brain state. And it means that when we are all the different levels, so in other words, able to notice, being aware, being attentive and mindful, then there is the possibility of consciousness where we really are understanding the sort of aha moment of our lives and what's going on at a deeper and inner level. So now we understand that we have a physical body, the picture on the left, and this is what we might call the form of a human being. So this human being looks as if they've got everything going for them, and indeed they have. But what we're suggesting is that there is a content, something intangible that's sitting inside them, and this is the sort of inner natures of who we are. And this is the bit that we might say is contingent on developing yourself, contingent on having the capacity to be quiet and to be guided and to be surrendered, contingent on the idea that life has been hard on you, but you've actually grown and developed. So the contingency is what has life thrown at you that has made you build your inner self or your soul. So if we go into the idea of soul, you can see that this is a model that we've developed, but actually it's been in all the old writings from Judaism, from pre-Aristotle to Islamic theology and Christian theology. So what have we got? We've got a material self, a vegetal self, an animal self, a human self, and then a noble self. Now, I could extend that into another two levels and suggest that there are levels called saints and prophets above that. But, for most of us, we're dealing with this very basic quality of what it is to be a human being. So our human nature is empowered by what we might call the human life force. And what this particular picture illustrates is that it's differentiated from what's below. In other words, the human itself knows its power and its ability to manipulate and drive itself and ambitious qualities, which is the animal, and knows what it holds in its feelings and emotions and sensibilities, which is the vegetal kingdom, and of course is able to recognize when he's operating or she's operating from ancestral patterns or memes that we've inherited from our environment, but also, of course, our family. However, most people are not really developed in the sense that they have all their qualities or natures in a sort of ordered, structured way. Many of us who are sort of go-getters and powerful humans have an undifferentiated state, meaning that their instincts and their humanity are together, which infers the idea that their human life force and their animal life force, the manipulative life force, actually are together. So they actually can't differentiate who's talking or who's driving the being, if you like, or the person. And this is actually rather uncomfortable, because these people are the alpha male and females. They're the ambitious top dogs of society. They're often politicians or entrepreneurs or people who are go-getters. And it's not that they're bad or good, it's just that when we meet people like this, not only are they opinionated and often dogmatic. It's interesting that dog is an animal part, so they're very strong in their assertions, and it's very difficult for them to change their minds. However, this is the nature of a human being who is driving their development slowly, bit by bit, and perhaps one day they will rise to a human station. For many people, they're also undifferentiated. It's where really the human and the animal and the vegetal kingdoms coerce or are sort of together. So they're living in a two-storied house, and the human actually isn't very sure who's doing the talking. So is it my feelings? Is it my power? Is it my human sensibilities? Who's who? And of course, they're influenced by their biome and their virome. And this vegetable life force, if you like, runs the show. So very often these people are in slight pathophysiology, meaning that their physiological mechanisms are under stress and that they illustrate problems with their digestion and their physiology generally. And it would seem that very many people are what we might call undifferentiated in the soul level. We're talking about this. So this is the idea that they're living in a metaphorical single-storied house, and that their animal self, human self, material self and vegetal self, along with their biome and virome, are all living in one room, or actually in one house. And what this means is they're actually coded to run the same patterning as their parents and as their ancestors. And they can't really discern who's running the show, because in fact all of these qualities within them are co-mixed and basically all got a voice that seems to be rather similar. I've added this slide in because it's quite an interesting one. It often happens that this internal structure actually juxtaposes in all the sort of situations of our lives as human beings. And when we don't have certain virtues that put the house in order, then these natures sort of basically jostle around and become dominant. So here we have a dominant material and a dominant animal, and so they're running the show. So the genetic coding of how they live a life that is habituated and sort of, if you like, held on a pathway or a particular path, that actually the human part of them is buried down in the bottom. Now, this is just an example, but it's to illustrate that these aspects of us can be higgledy-piggledy and not in their rightful position. Likewise, when the house is not in order but appears to be in order, in this case we have a dominant animal and material just below it in the animal level and the human in the vegetal level, and poor old feelings down at the base. It means that their feelings are buried, that the human is sort of sitting in a sort of vegetative spot, which means that they're actually unable really to sort of move or be motivated. They're a bit lethargic. That sitting on top of them is a rather heavy mass called gravity, but actually it's the material nature. So they're metaphorically buried underneath this mass, and then sitting on top, being rather smug, is the animal part, who's dominant. So this would be a person who's sexually present, who's cortisol dominant, who's driven, reflexive, habitual. To allow us to understand all of this, I think we should see ourselves like a house. In this particular instance, we've made a house that's got a basement, or actually a deep basement, an initial basement, and then first floor, second floor, third floor, and a fifth floor. And it represents the different levels that we coexist in. So this human body of ours has all the servants. I mean, we are material, we are physiological, we are mammalian, and we are human. And we have these paired binary qualities within us. And so we have, if you like, 0, 1, yin yang, female male, and then left and right brain. However, it may be that our soul has not fully developed. We may have a, if you like, immature soul, or a soul that is trying to develop or has just incarnated, or a soul that is vegetal, or a soul that is animal, or a soul that is indeed human. There are probably very few people who are noble creatures in this world, but we'd like, obviously, to think so. So we can think of our outer body as being duality or binary in function, and that our inner self, our inner body of being, is singular. The following slides are here to just simply illustrate at a metaphorical level what happens when one of the elements in our binary system becomes dominant. So here we have a feminine aspect of the system rising up. So this is matrilineal, or a potential, and that it pushes, if you like, our yin feelings, so stored energy, stored feelings, stored emotion, that then pushes up on the animal in our behavior, so it makes us behave in a particular way, and that drives the left brain up into, if you like, the ethers, or sort of thought that actually isn't very practical. So it's just an example. In this instance, you see that the vegetative part of us has risen up. The animal is rather attracted to it, so it drops its head, metaphorically, and is feeding off these old feelings, these sensations that have been stored in the body, because this is yin feelings. And then the left brain, if you like, follows in our behavior. So what happens is, on the other side, is that our lofty brain, so the right brain, ascends and pulls up with it the animal or our behavior. So again, this is just an example of what happens with the human state, our psyche, our pathologies and our pathophysiologies, in a way, are sort of concurrent with what's going on internally inside the human frame. In this instance, we have deep in the system the animal-human content or nature or soul. And so at some implicit level, the lower systems are now in balance. But what happens at the animal-human level is that the human is very unable to really reconcile its status, and therefore becomes imbalanced at the sort of merest drop of the hat, if you like. And so here is the right brain dropping towards our behavior, and the left brain rising up and getting us caught into thought and ideas and concepts. When we've developed our inner selves, then it's much easier for our outer form, so the different systems that we have and the different binary components, to be balanced. Of course, we switch on and off. Of course, we have moments when our sensibilities and our feelings push us out of balanced state, or when our behavior runs amok. But actually, really what it means is that when the natures are developed, then the outer aspects of who we are become much more easier to balance and to integrate, and therefore they don't run us like they did before when we were undeveloped. it might be useful to just be reminded that we have a corpus callosum that allows the left brain to govern the right side of the body and vice versa with the right brain. And so the left brain governs the masculine aspect of our gender, so our drive, our ability to go into new territory, to fight, to perhaps run amok, to kill indeed. And we have these active feelings, and also we have the potential that we can switch on and off at will. And the right brain looks after our sort of intuition, so the feminine aspect of our bodies, which is the female quality of who we are, which is the female animal, has the idea of instinct. So our instincts are housed in there. It's a metaphor, of course. And then in our yin state, our intuition is housed in there. And downstairs in the material, we have innate understanding, which we've been given by our parents and forebears. And of course, at the human level, on the right brain, we have this capacity to have a knowing, and that at a higher level, when we are noble creatures, we have the capacity to have wisdom. So how do we support the well-being of this house? Well, there are two aspects here. One, on the right-hand side, is called the caduceus. We've modified it a bit. And then on the left-hand side is, of course, the heart, and actually love. And so we're going to talk about that now. The caduceus of old is a very old model that probably came out of pre-Babylonian times and has been variously used in many different cultures to illustrate all sorts of things, but mainly nowadays as a symbol of medicine. So you've got a staff, you've got a snake, a pair of wings, and I've added a dove above that, and way beyond that, a diamond to represent the descent of love or acknowledgement from the divine. So the caduceus composed of basically three qualities: integrity, which is the staff; flexibility, which is the snake; reflectiveness, which is the pair of wings. And then the dove is a sort of addition on our part, which is the idea of being mindful or surrendered. And this caduceus is really something that we give as a task to the left brain. It becomes a pillar of development for the human in his journey to become a singular entity or whole human being. So along with the caduceus and now what we might call the hearts, what we're doing here is presenting the idea of a twofold psycho-spiritual model, really of preventive health. This is a task, the development of the hearts, for the right brain. And you can see that there are a number of different hearts on this card, which I will now begin to explain. Love starts the process. Our need to make love, our need to have sex, our need to copulate, our need to come together, our psychic dynamics that want man and woman to come together and create something new is really the sort of epitome of all of this work. And you'll notice that what I've done here is, instead of having a trimester of gestation, I divided it into 4 to illustrate developmental qualities that occur in the human embryonic development. As the embryo develops through the first 10, second 10, third 10, and 4th or 40th weeks of gestation, the caduceus actually is involved in, obviously in a transparent, opaque way, that you don't really see it at all, but you can actually sense it in observing that the gestation of the baby is dependent on these qualities. We all know that gestation needs a sequential ordering of parts for it to come out from, if you like, sperm and egg to mature baby that's ready to be born. What we suggest is that the caduceus unfolds during these 40 weeks. So here we are, our soul incarnates, that's the left-hand picture, and the sperm and the egg come together, and over 10 weeks, what happens is that the primitive notochord is developed, and somewhere along that line, the mother innately feels that this baby is going to survive. It's got an intact notochord, and this is integrity. Is there an integrity of the notochord? And if so, the baby is not aborted but continues. Over the next 10 weeks, the baby develops much of its physiological mechanisms, and around the 20-week mark, slightly before, sometimes slightly after, women often will say, I felt it, it's moving. It's actually called a quickening. And so we have realized or understood that the caduceus, the actual snake part of the caduceus, it's not a very good terminology actually, but the movement of life, the rhythm of life, the unfolding of life is now manifest in that in the mother's womb. Following the next 10 weeks, when the neurology develops and the animal part of us, the sex and the gender and the eyes and the ears and all the higher senses are beginning to mature up, right at about 30 weeks, the baby is said to be able to see through the womb at shadow, light and dark, if you like, and recognize, I guess, size or shape or something. And so we've seen that this development of reflectiveness, or development of, in fact, our optic system, is parallel to the idea of the wings, that suddenly we have a pair of wings, this avian quality to allow us to see from nearby or afar. The following 10 weeks, which the baby then fully matures, its brain develops rapidly, is able to survive on its own. Even, in fact, of course, we now know that babies survive at a very early age because of modern technology, but by and large, this means that at 40 weeks the baby is born mature and able to survive. And we've put the dove there because it represents the idea that the baby needs to surrender as it comes out of the mother's pelvis, or surrenders when it's taken out by caesarean section, and the mother itself has to surrender to allow that birth to be congruent and integral and whole and loving. Now love, of course, is carried right through this whole process. So at the end, that card there represents the 5 levels of love. And love obviously develops over one's lifetime, so we'll talk about that in a moment. So these two essential processes could be likened to pillars on either side of a house. They, of course, are totally artificial. They don't really exist. But what we've seen is that they are psycho-spiritual models of essential virtues that allow a human being to create an environment of preventive health. In other words, as we develop these qualities, health ensures, or when, of course, we do get sick on occasions, that health is rapidly recovered, and it doesn't necessarily lead to death or necrosis or frank pathology or chronic illness. These four elements that we now see as being the holy or noble caduceus, although the first three are really what came out of Asclepius, the father of medicine in the Greek islands many hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Asclepius was characterized by having a staff, and that in his healing sanctuaries he would have brown tree snakes slithering around the ground or climbing up trees, and that he would make his patients, the people who came to see him, to go into rooms where they would be asked to dream, and to dream specifically about their illness or misfortune, and so that they would come out with an enlightened understanding. In other words, they had put their finger on the problem, which is integrity, and they had found the cause, which would be flexibility, and metaphorically they have swallowed the poison. And this type of healing was an extraordinary shift from the healing that had preceded it. And so we've taken the caduceus because I think it's an extremely good model of development, added the surrender, because surrender is a quality that we humans need to be mindful, which really means mindless. In other words, an open mind, so that we can actually be guided from a higher source of knowledge. Now, what are the contingencies of this? Well, integrity, of course, is that I have integrity, you have integrity, we stand upright, we have a spine, we have intact nervous system mostly, and our vascular systems are all upright. So we're an upright being. But are we upright in our ethics? Are we upright in our ability to not to steal or not to lie or not to hit someone metaphorically over the head? Do we misuse this club that can hurt? Do we misuse this dagger that can pierce? Do we misuse our penis, for example, and penetrate others inappropriately and with force? So integrity has many different nuances because it's a straight line. It's an integer, something that makes whole. And so the contingencies are many. So if we misuse this quality, then of course our integrity is really not whole or integral. Likewise, in flexibility is the quality of being adaptable, the quality of being able to be expansive or actually contractile. It's really the sort of dynamic of life. Are we dynamic, or do we have a sort of small wave band or small band in our hearing? So flexibility is a quality where we can again misuse it. So, for example, if it is a snake, which of course it's not, but we can of course use our tongues as a poisonous attribute. We can say things that are inappropriate. We can bite someone. We can tie them up, we can hang them with our flexible minds or flexible behavior. So flexibility has, again, this sort of huge gamut of qualities associated with it. And if those qualities are poor or not developed, then we might say that we're not terribly flexible or adaptable. Likewise, the eagle represents the capacity to fly, to be amused, to go off in the corner and look down at our situation and see it from a different point of view. It's the development not only of survival qualities but also of perceptual qualities, so our hearing and our smelling, taste, and actually also of proprioception. So all these higher senses, which we sort of upgraded into the human realm, allow us to be much more attentive about what's really going on and thus mindful of who we are as human beings. Now, those qualities may not be developed. So again, this eagle might be a reflexive dynamic rather than reflective. And reflexive means that it's reactive, so we're operating from what's below, the animal aspect of us, or that we're using it from above, which is the human quality that allows us to be reflective about a situation. And of course, the dove. The dove represents surrender, the idea of surrendering to a higher source of information, the explicate. But also we can surrender to our proclivities, our sexuality, our books and things that we like to read, or our weekly or daily or nightly television programs. In other words, we can surrender to all sorts of things which actually don't make us whole or integral, but make us rather sort of caught in the web of the human life that most of us lead. The hearts are a very interesting process because it's not something that most of us think about. This work has come out of really Sufi ideas or Islamic theology about the development of the hearts, and they have a particular slant on it. I have a particular different slant, although it's pretty similar. So first of all, at the bottom on the left, we have a heart that's cradled in a pair of hands, and what this infers is that we offer our heart up to the Creator, up to this implicate reality for it to be cleaned. Because actually we're holding the heart of our ancestors within ourselves. That's what we inherit. We inherit from mum and dad all the patterns of love that they themselves have manifested. And those can be heartache, and they can be pain, and they can be bloated and blighted and not functioning properly. So all the sort of pathophysiologies of a heart that's gone wrong carry with it the history of love in that particular person or familial lineage. So what do? We offer the heart up, and we hope and trust that we can germinate, in other words, grow from that previous heart and grow a heart that is beyond our family patterns. And then we go to number 2, where we clean that heart, wash it, so that the heart is no longer wallowing in feelings and emotions and sensations, but actually it's washed and cleaned and purified. And that heart then is able to be open and clear and easy and flighty, which is number 3, which is the heart of air. And this heart of air allows us not to be touched by people's jealousies and people's misunderstandings which they throw at you or look at you or think about you. So those insults bypass your heart because the heart is airy and it's held by you with a piece of string. It's a metaphor, of course, which is like integrity or flexibility, and that the heart just wobbles away and you don't actually feel it at all. And then the human heart. Well, this is the heart that's made of fire. It's called the heart of fire. And it's really about the enthusiastic heart, which infers that there is an enthusiasm, which means to allow God to come through. And these are the people who, once it's developed, and mind you, it has to be developed first, is that prior to that, that heart can scorch and hurt and scald and burn because it's a fiery heart. It's an orator's heart. But when it's developed as a at the nature of who we are, then what happens is that heart becomes a pathfinder. It becomes an aspect that lights up the shadows. It can cauterize wounds. It really is an extraordinary heart, and it's a human heart. And that leads us to the fifth, which is the divine heart. In other words, meaning that we manifest an unconditional capacity to love others and ourselves. And then, if you like, the last card on this page, upper right, is the inner heart. It's a much more difficult concept to have, but it's the idea that love comes down, it descends into you, and you manifest it into life. And there are plenty people who are able to do that, thank goodness, in this difficult and hard world that we live in. So you can see that this is an evolutionary journey. And the card on the left really represents what's called the Fibonacci spiral. The Fibonacci spiral can be seen in several ways, but the one that we're using is that in Leonardo's Canon of Proportions, you can see that there is a human who's holding onto a box, and then when they straddle and uplift their arms, we metaphorically are sitting on a circle. Well, this is the male and female brains, which encapsulate or box us in. And the Fibonacci spiral is the idea that we, in fact, come out of that pattern into a new paradigm. And so the new paradigms are the important thing, because what we're really doing is going on an evolutionary journey, where we move through the soul that is material, and in other words, it's very like the soul of our parents, and it's rather basic and solid and dependable, to a soul that is vegetative or feeling, aware, awake, to a soul that is behaviorally powerful, that is able to do things well in life, and to be a consistent hard worker for the goodness of life and the well-being of other human beings. And then we have a human soul that is really the capacity for us to write, to create poetry, to build extraordinary buildings, to make extraordinary things in science. And it's the heart, it's the nature that allows the human to develop things that are good for mankind rather than bad. And then above that you have a noble creature, a saintly creature, a Christ-like creature, and then really the prophets that really manifest right through all of society and all of the different nations of this world. So what I'm asking us to do is to see ourselves as developing as a fivefold expression of being, so that we have this intact, whole, complete and integral nature within us, which is noble. So that's the top card at the top of the line of cards that we've got there. And this nobility is really allows us to have noble qualities and noble feelings and noble thoughts about our body, our sensations and awareness, our doings and behavior, our thoughts, and of course our worship or connection to a higher source of being. Again, to remind you that the form, which is a classical osteopathic concept, the form or our structure governs the way that we work. So our constitutional body governs our physiology, that governs our instinctual body, our ability to move through time and space, governs our human nature, and ultimately the human nature has the capacity to really surrender and have a noble connection to himself. And how does he do this? He does this because his inner self has begun to develop, the soul, which most of the time we don't really talk about because it's a difficult subject. Most of us don't know very much, and we don't really know how to talk about this essence or soul. So we abstractly talk about someone's soul or my soul or whatever, but it's really slightly distant. And what we're inferring is that these psycho-spiritual forms, like the divine forms, but these aren't divine, they are man-made without a shadow of doubt, impress upon our function, which then presses upon our structure. So it's the reverse order. And what this does is it creates well-being and it creates health. And as I said previously, right at the beginning of this talk, it doesn't necessarily stop us from getting sick or hurting ourselves or having sort of problems or accidents in our lives. But what it does do is that it gives us, first of all, the love to survive and to be bigger than our hurts, but also the capacity for us to be guided to see why we're sick or why we're ill or why we're dysfunctional. And that's what the caduceus helps us to do when we truly function from that part of ourselves. And so, to reiterate, the soul governs us. And when the soul governs us, it allows love to truly manifest. And when the soul really talks and allows us to, if you like, be heard, then we understand that surrender and being mindful can allow us to be guided from the spiritual realms, and so that we're given new information and new understanding of who we are. And this promotes well-being and health.